Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Michael Fillios, founder and CEO of IT Ally and a CDO editorial board member. And we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Ali Khan, Chief Data Officer at Experian Consumer Services. Ali, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
So sticking with that theme of data governance, I'll ask you the same question earlier about how would you approach that in SMB? And as you mentioned, being a data company, I'm sure it helps for everyone to understand these topics. But as an SMB, in your experience, thinking about governance sometimes can be challenging, and how to manage data as an asset. So what advice or thoughts do you have on that front, Ali, as we think about it as an SMB?
So again, I mean, I think this is it's the same types of things, but it's just a question of sort of scale, right? So I'll answer in two ways. The first is, the activities I think are pretty much the same regardless of size. So you start with cataloging or classification, right? So understanding, what's out there, right? How sensitive is it? Is it customer sensitive? Is it or not? Is it compliance within the jurisdiction of some sort of compliance requirement or not, regulatory requirement, things like that. The second is access. Okay, so now that you've understood what the data is and how sensitive it is, who is it that can have access to it, right? And implementing that and auditing that. And the third one is enablement, right? Third one is, okay, now that you've understood it and you've got the right people having access to it, how do you now use that for benefit? And that's the the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? It's hard work, but at the end of it, that's where you get the value. And that's as true for a company like Experian, which has many data scientists and data engineers are working on it, as it is for an SMB. The one thing that I would caution with an SMB, similar to what I mentioned before about over-engineering, is to think carefully about tool adoption in particular. Data governance tools, like other tools within the data management ecosystem, they go through this sort of cycle of bundling and unbundling, right? You think of Informatica, maybe back in the day, right? It was an ETL tool. It was a good ETL tool, but then it sort of became everything, right? It becomes your metadata management and your data governance tool and all of it, right? And so then, with tools like that, without picking on Informatica, right? There's a sense of okay, even if I'm a big company, this is getting large and unwieldy now. And if I'm a small company, I'm just not even going to go there. And so then there's this sort of conscious unbundling. Like now you can buy just a data catalog, right? And there are a number of tools that are just lightweight. Some are open source, some are commercial offerings. And you can start with that. But even there, like caution has to be exercised. I talked with a lot of vendors and vendor leadership, and I was like, look, okay, so you went through this, you're this single play data governance tool, you do it really well, but I see you giving into the same temptation of adding more and more and more features to it and becoming unwieldy and becoming expensive. So I think everyone has to be attuned to that. I'm very attuned to that, but with an SMB, I think that's even more important, not just because you might end up spending more money than you want, but also you're going to have the operational cost of a heavy system, without necessarily having the type of adoption that you would want. And data governance tools are all about adoption. They're only as good as the adoption is broad, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I have a couple of follow-ups on this one, because as you were talking, I'm also thinking about how do you talk about data without talking about security, and some of the things that you brought up there with respect to access. And I just wonder, in some of the initiatives that you have underway, are you working closely with security, especially in this heightened, awareness environment?
Absolutely. I mean, I've said a couple of times that Experian is a data company. It's also a security company, or it's also a data security company. So we have a breach, detection division, right? Advisory division. So we advise some of the largest and most security conscious companies in the world, right? In banking and other industries on breaches that they may have, right? We have dark web monitoring, services, and just lots of services in that vein. And so if we're selling those services, and of course there's a huge demand for those, we have to exhibit those ourselves. And so Experian is absolutely uncompromising on security. And I think, again, this is not driven purely by regulatory concerns. It is the right thing to do. It's an incredible privilege for any company to have the type of data that we do about our consumers, and we will protect that data, and we will help our consumers with the data that we have. So yeah, security is woven into every aspect of our data operation.
It makes sense, and that's good to hear, and it's expected in today's sort of contemporary organizations. Along those lines, we talk about the governance of data, but at the same breath also you can talk about the quality of the data, and maybe you can share a little bit about the journey there with respect to data quality and how you're addressing that challenge as well.
Yeah, data quality. So one of my favorite topics, right? So, I think data quality, and I think you probably hear this from other leaders as well in the space. The important thing to understand about data quality is that it's never done, right? It's sort of an ongoing, challenge, right? And so, given that, I think you have to be really realistic about, what the goals are for quality by the data asset that you're talking about, right? And given the purpose that it's for. So for example, if I am a public company and I'm, publishing numbers, to the street, okay, so that data needs to be 100%, perfect, right? Because there are all kinds of problems if that is not, right? But if I'm using data for, internal analysis, I can tolerate, maybe a slight deviation from that, right? So really, because it's for internal, sort of early analysis. And so setting the thresholds and expectations is really important. Expecting that your data is going to be, if you think it's going to be perfect all the time across all the dimensions, you're going to be very disappointed, very quickly, right? And so I think you have to be really realistic about it. You have to treat it as an ongoing discipline. Again, the catalog is the key, right? The understanding, what you have, as the beginning point is really the key. Once you have that and you establish its value and its sensitivity, and you assign ownership in terms of stewardship, those are sort of key things to really start, setting up a quality program.
Excellent. Before the formal conversation started, of course, we were talking a little bit about Scholastic and your experience there. And, as a medium-sized company, perhaps, and some of the challenges as it relates to building the data analytics practice there, and getting involved with hiring some of the first big data engineers and scientists and machine learning scientists and such. Can you talk about some of your challenges at Scholastic during that journey?
Yeah. So I joined Scholastic in I think it was 2014. And so this was relatively early days for AWS for a lot of companies, and certainly for Scholastic. And so I think that there was a lot of debate at that time about the cloud, and all of these considerations were all the concerns were from a very valid place, right? Scholastic, also, of course, is extremely, data security conscious, given that, at that time, we were in 90,000 American schools and had, I always used to argue that we know more about American school children than the US government or the Department of Education. So incredibly, sensitive data and important data, right? As anyone can understand. And so there were a lot of very legitimate questions about, okay, what's the security posture, and really holding AWS in this case to account on what those were. And so that was a fairly lengthy process, and I think not that uncommon. And I think cloud providers now have gotten a lot stronger in their sort of security posture. There's things like GovRAMP and so on. But at that time, it was still sort of early days. So I think that was the first challenge, and then moving beyond that and realizing that we could actually improve our security posture by going to the cloud, right, and leveraging Amazon and its services. That was sort of the breakthrough, and we did build what we call the Scholastic Data Cloud, in there that was allowed us to do a lot more real-time, analysis as we moved some sort of from traditional books to more and more into digital and ebooks, which gives you just a ton of interesting data, right? And then I think the second one that was really interesting was, Scholastic's an incredible company, right? A lot of deep institutional wisdom there, as you might expect, right? People with decades of experience as educators, as sort of educational psychologists, people like that, right? And so machine learning is a funny thing, right? So, in the early days, when you're setting up something, your models are not well trained, and you may come up with just odd recommendations, and there's just a lot of skepticism that these approaches could come up with any recommendations better than the collective wisdom and experience of the folk there. And they were right in the beginning. That was certainly true, right? But then after a few months, you begin to find accord between the recommendations that are coming out of various models and sort of the prevailing wisdom. So then there's some acceptance there, right? And then eventually, I won't say that it superseded, but it certainly became a useful complement to the folks, who were there leading the strategy. And there was it was sort of a journey that continued, even after I left, of accepting, to a greater and greater degree, sort of the outcomes that were coming from machine learning. So it was really interesting to see that whole journey, and this was back in 2014, and still sort of relatively, early, especially, for that industry.
Sure. And like you said, for a 100-year-old company, right? So that's quite a bit of change.
But they are right at the cutting edge now, really have come an incredible way.
That's terrific. Well, listen, you share a little bit about your sort of background and how you came to be passionate and involved in this industry and in this functional role. So we always like to ask, our leaders, what advice would you give to someone who's maybe thinking about this field as a career, and try to help them sort out what might be of interest to them to pursue it?
Yeah. No, I like this question. One of my tasks or goals as a leader is to keep people inspired, right? And keep their excitement, right? Even if they've been doing this for a long time. And so here, in my team, I'm blessed to have really outstanding data scientists and data engineers and machine learning engineers and analysts and so on, right? Data product owners. So the question that I like to ask them is, if I feel like they sort of need a boost, is like, why did you get into this in the first place? Like, what was the thing that first excited you? I ask myself the same question, right? From time to time, right? And invariably, people say, I was just curious. I just wanted to know. Like, the data gave me another way to understand something, and I wanted to just pursue that. And I said, so that is exactly what we do, And so I remind myself of that. I remind my team of that, from time to time. And that's the same thing that I would mention to any, and I have done. I've talked to various, colleges and things like that, and having sort of 2 college-age children now as well, is maintain that curiosity. Always be sort of curious, and then always be tenacious. I think. It's an adage, right? Like, the more you know, the more you realize you really don't know, right? The world is vast, the amount of data that's being generated is incredible. And so I think that there's certain humility that's required with that. But those are the 2 things, remain curious and be tenacious, and I think if you do that, you will, you've picked so first of all, congratulate that person on their interest. You've picked potentially a wonderful career that can be, fulfilling, for many decades to come.
Very well said. Well, listen, Ali, thank you very much. I truly enjoyed the conversation, and I think others will as well. And I very much appreciate your time today. And if you want to learn more about CDO Magazine or view other interviews, please visit cdomagazine.tech. Thank you very much again. Be safe and be well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.